It happened on one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. My shift had been brutal, I was running late for a meeting, and in my rush, I must have dropped my wallet somewhere on the way to work. I didn't realize it until I got to the cafe and reached into my pocket to pay for my coffee, and it was gone. My heart sank. Everything was in there, my ID, credit cards, $120 in cash, and even a little photo of my mom that I had carried around since I was a kid. Losing the money was bad, but that photo? That one hurt the most. I retraced my steps, checked the sidewalk, the bus stop, even asked the guy at the cafe if anyone had turned it in. Nothing. I felt that familiar wave of frustration wash over me, the one that comes when you know you screwed up, but there's nothing you can do about it. I was about to call my bank and start canceling my cards when I heard someone say, "Hey, is this yours?" I turned around, and there he was, a man in tattered clothes, holding up my wallet. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, his hands rough and calloused. His hair was long and matted, his jacket at least 2 sizes too big, and I could tell he had been living on the streets for a while. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process what was happening. My first instinct was relief, followed immediately by shock, because when I opened my wallet, everything was still there. Every dollar. Every card. Even the tiny folded note I kept in the back. He could have easily taken the cash and ditched the rest, and I wouldn't have blamed him. Instead, he had gone out of his way to find me. "I saw it fall when you got off the bus," he explained, rubbing the back of his neck. "Figured you'd need it." I was so overwhelmed that I immediately pulled out a $50 bill and held it out to him. "Thank you, man. Seriously, take this, please." But he shook his head. "Nah," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "You probably need it more than I do." And with that, he turned and started walking away. I stood there, holding the money, completely frozen. Something about that moment hit me hard. I don't know what it was, maybe the kindness in his voice, maybe the fact that he had just proven to be a better person than half the people I knew. But instead of going about my day, I found myself following him. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the fact that a total stranger had just shown me more honesty and kindness than half the people in my life. But as I watched him walk away, something in me just wouldn't let it go. So I shoved my wallet into my pocket and started following him. Not in a creepy way, I told myself, just to see where he was going. He moved quickly, weaving through the crowd like he knew exactly where he was headed. I expected him to stop on a street corner, maybe sit down and ask for change, but he didn't. Instead, he walked with purpose, turning down an alleyway between 2 buildings. I hesitated. I had no reason to be afraid, but there was something unsettling about following a complete stranger into an alley. Still, I kept going, staying a few steps behind. At the end of the alley, there was an abandoned lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with old newspapers and broken bottles. And in the corner, almost hidden behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets, was a small, makeshift shelter, a collection of blankets, cardboard, and an overturned shopping cart filled with neatly stacked books. That's when I realized this wasn't just where he slept. This was his home. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw her. A small girl, no older than 6 or 7, curled up inside the blankets, holding a tattered teddy bear against her chest. She looked up as the man approached, her face lighting up in relief. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling down beside her. "I got you something today." From his pocket, he pulled out a small juice box and a half-eaten sandwich, wrapped carefully in a napkin. The girl took them eagerly, sipping at the juice like it was the greatest thing in the world. My throat tightened. I stepped forward without thinking, and he finally noticed me. His expression changed immediately, the calm, easygoing look from before was gone, replaced by worry. "You followed me?" he asked. I swallowed, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I just wanted to thank you again," I stammered. I hesitated before adding, "and maybe, help." His eyes narrowed. I don't need charity. It's not charity, I said quickly. You didn't take my money before. But, maybe I can get you something? Real food, at least? There was a long pause. He looked at the little girl, then back at me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to say no, to keep his pride. But then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. All right, he muttered. But only for her. Not me. We walked together to the nearest grocery store. I let him pick out food, fruit, bread, some cans of soup, even a couple of small treats for the girl. He refused to take anything for himself. When I tried to insist, he just shook his head. She eats first, he said simply. By the time we got back to the alley, the little girl was fast asleep. He carefully tucked a blanket around her before turning back to me. You don't need to keep doing this, he said. We'll be fine. You said that already, I pointed out. But I don't think fine means what you think it does. For the first time, he actually smiled. It was small, tired, but real. That was the first night. It wasn't the last. I started visiting them every evening, bringing food, warm clothes, even books for the girl to read. Over time, he opened up. His name was Michael, and he had once had a normal life, a job, a house, a family. But after losing his wife to cancer, he'd fallen into debt, and when things spiraled out of control, he'd ended up on the streets with his daughter, Emily. He had been doing his best to keep them together ever since. I couldn't change everything overnight. But I could help. And eventually, with time, we did more than survive. We got them a place to stay. A real home. And it all started because a homeless man returned my wallet without taking a single dollar. I still remember that day like it was yesterday. I was 19 years old, broke, and struggling to make ends meet. I had just moved out of my parents' house, working a minimum wage job while trying to juggle school. Rent was due in 3 days, my bank account was barely hanging on, and I was down to my last $20. I told myself I could make it work, I just needed a few groceries to last the week. So there I was, standing in line at the checkout of a tiny grocery store, clutching a small basket with the absolute bare minimum, a loaf of bread, some instant noodles, a bag of rice, and a few canned goods. Nothing fancy. Just enough to survive. When I got to the register, the cashier rang everything up, and I swiped my card, declined. I felt my face heat up instantly. I tried again, forcing a nervous smile. Declined. My stomach dropped. The cashier gave me a sympathetic look, but the guy behind me in line sighed loudly, clearly impatient. My hands started shaking as I fumbled for my wallet, praying I had a few dollars in cash. I pulled out crumpled bills, counted the coins in my pocket, still short by $4.76. I could feel the people in line staring. I wanted to sink into the floor. I can put something back, I mumbled, reaching for the bread. Before I could even move, a hand appeared over my shoulder, holding a $10 bill. Don't worry about it, a voice said. I turned around and saw a woman in her late 40s, dressed in a plain sweater and jeans. She had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, the kind that made you feel safe. Are you sure? I stammered, feeling both embarrassed and grateful. She just smiled. It's just a few bucks. Pay it forward someday. I nodded, speechless, and watched as she handed the cashier the money. I thanked her over and over, feeling my throat tighten. That day, she didn't just help me buy groceries, she saved me from absolute humiliation. I promised myself I'd pay it forward one day. What I didn't know was that I'd get the chance to repay her directly, 10 years later. Life got better for me after that. It took a few years, but I worked my way up. I finished school, landed a stable job, and eventually, I was in a place where money wasn't my biggest worry anymore. But no matter how much time passed, I never forgot that woman, the way she stepped in without hesitation, her simple words, pay it forward someday. And I did. A lot. Whenever I saw someone struggling at the grocery store, I'd cover their bill. If a coworker was short on cash for lunch, I'd spot them, no questions asked. I never told them why, I just hoped it made their day a little easier, the way she had done for me. Then, 10 years later, fate brought us back together. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and I had stopped at a grocery store after work to pick up some things. I wasn't in a rush, so I wandered the aisles, grabbing random snacks and stuff I didn't really need. As I headed toward the checkout, I noticed a woman standing near the register, counting change in her palm. She looked tired, her sweater a little worn, her hair tied back in a messy bun. Her cart wasn't even full, just basic essentials like milk, eggs, and bread. And then I saw it, the cashier telling her she was short. She started putting things back. My chest tightened. I knew that feeling. I had been that person. Before I even thought about it, I stepped forward and said, "I got it." She turned to me, startled. "Oh, no, you don't have to," she started, but I was already handing my card to the cashier. "It's just a few bucks," I said, smiling. "Pay it forward someday." That's when she froze. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I really looked at her face. It was her. The woman who had helped me 10 years ago. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she let out a small gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's you." My throat tightened. I nodded. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she laughed shakily. "I always wondered if you remembered." "Are you kidding?" I chuckled, my voice a little thick. "I've been waiting 10 years to do this." She shook her head, still in shock. I never expected to be on this side of things. I didn't ask what had happened in her life, why she was struggling now. It didn't matter. She had helped me when I needed it most, and now it was my turn. We stood there for a moment, just smiling at each other, caught in a full-circle moment that neither of us could have predicted. And as she walked away, wiping her eyes, I knew one thing for sure. Some debts aren't meant to be repaid with money. Some debts are meant to be repaid with kindness. I lost my mom 3 years ago. It still doesn't feel real sometimes, like I'll pick up my phone to call her, only to remember she's not there anymore. Losing her was like losing a part of myself, and even though time has helped, there's still this empty space where she used to be. She was the kind of person who lit up a room without even trying, warm, strong, always smiling. The kind of mom who never missed a school recital, who somehow made every birthday feel magical, who always knew the right thing to say when life got hard. She held our family together in a way I never really understood until she was gone. And now, with her absence, I felt like I was constantly searching for pieces of her in the things she left behind. A few months ago, I finally worked up the courage to go through her old things. Her closet, her drawers, the boxes of keepsakes she had stored away in the attic. It was something I had put off for years, not just because it was hard, but because in some ways, I felt like if I went through her things, it meant accepting that she was really gone. Each item I touched felt like a tiny piece of her life, frozen in time. I found her old perfume bottle, the one that used to linger in the air when she hugged me before work. I found her favorite sweater, still faintly carrying the scent of her fabric softener. And then, in a small wooden chest tucked away in the corner of her closet, I found a stack of old letters. At first, I thought they were just old birthday cards or notes she had saved from friends. But when I picked up the top one, I noticed something strange. It was sealed. Still tucked neatly inside its original envelope, as if it had never been sent. The paper was yellowed with age, the corners slightly frayed from time. My fingers traced over the handwriting on the front, my mom's handwriting. But it wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't addressed to my dad, either. It was addressed to someone I had never heard of before. And the date in the corner? It was written before I was even born. My stomach twisted. Who was this letter meant for? And why had my mom never sent it? Something about it felt intensely personal, like I was stepping into a part of my mother's life that she had never meant for me to see. I hesitated, my hands trembling as I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope. I had two choices: leave it untouched, let her secret stay buried, or open it and risk changing everything I thought I knew about her. I took a deep breath, and I carefully opened the letter. My hands trembled as I slid my finger under the old envelope flap, carefully peeling it open like it might crumble in my hands. The paper inside was thin and delicate, creased from being folded for decades. I unfolded it slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs as I prepared myself for what? A love letter? A message to an old friend? Some forgotten part of her past she never spoke about? But as my eyes skimmed the first few lines, my breath caught in my throat. Dear Michael, it began. Michael. The name didn't mean anything to me. My mom had never mentioned anyone by that name. I kept reading, my fingers gripping the fragile paper so tightly I thought it might tear. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll ever send it. But I need to say this somewhere, even if it stays locked away forever. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. There was so much emotion in her handwriting, like every word had been carefully chosen but still bursting with something unsaid. I thought I could move on, but there's not a single day that passes where I don't wonder what life would have been like if I had made a different choice. If I had been braver. If I had held on to you tighter, instead of letting you go. My hands went cold. I don't regret the life I built. I love my family, and I will spend my life making sure they are happy. But in another universe, another timeline, I think you and I could have had something beautiful. I stopped reading. The world felt like it had tilted sideways. My mom was talking about someone else. Someone she loved before my dad. And the way she wrote about him, it wasn't casual, it wasn't a silly teenage crush she had forgotten. It was deep, raw, unresolved. I forced myself to keep reading. I still remember the way you laughed when we got caught in the rain that night. How you swore we'd grow old together, no matter what. I wanted to believe it. I wanted so badly to believe it. But I was scared, Michael. And I let that fear push me away from you. I let everyone else's voices drown out my own. And I walked away. I felt physically sick. She had never told me about this. Not once. Maybe, in another life, we found our way back to each other. But in this one, I hope you found happiness. I hope someone loves you the way I should have. I hope you know that I never, ever stopped thinking about you. The letter ended with no goodbye. No signature. Just a final, unspoken thought hanging in the air. I sat there, staring at the paper, my mind racing. Had my mom spent her whole life loving someone in silence? Was this some great lost love she had hidden deep inside herself? And what did it mean for my dad? Did he know? Did she ever tell him? Or had she kept this secret locked away, pretending everything was fine? I thought about all the times I had seen my mom staring out the window, lost in thought. The way she sometimes seemed distant, nostalgic, like she was looking at something I couldn't see. And now I knew. She had been thinking of him. I refolded the letter carefully, my hand still shaking. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Was it even my place to know this? To see this part of her heart she had never shared with anyone? I wanted to be angry. I wanted to feel betrayed. But instead, all I felt was sadness. She had loved deeply, in a way that had never truly left her. And now, that love was just words on a page, locked inside an old envelope, buried in a forgotten chest. I sat there for a long time, just holding the letter, feeling like I had met a version of my mother I had never known before. A version of her that, maybe, had never been able to fully say goodbye.